Moses' Upper Desert Discourse. It's found in Deuteronomy, chapter 6. A number of years ago, I had two experiences which marked me for life. They were separated by many years and by many miles, but they were brought together by the Spirit of God in my thinking. I was a young, naive pastor in the city of Fort Worth, Texas. And at the conclusion of one of the morning worship services, a mother of 5 came up and said, "Pastor, I want you to know that every time the doors of this church are open, I will guarantee that my 5 children will be here." And in my youthful enthusiasm, I was carried away with excitement. In fact, I shared it with my wife, but for some strange reason, she didn't rise to the occasion. And I was soon to discover why. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a fraud. A fraud being perpetrated by many a Christian parent who in effect takes his child to the doors of an evangelical church and deposits him there and says, "Here, you lead my child to Christ. You teach him the Word of God." And in so doing, he feels he has shed himself of the responsibility that God has placed at his doorstep. Besides, he has a very convenient dumping ground. Should the young man or woman not turn out to his specification, then he always has someone to blame. Many years after this, I was ministering in the East, and a prominent pastor came up at the conclusion of the meeting, placed a bulletin beneath my nose and said, "Look at that, Hendricks. Something going on every night in the week." I said, "Are you proud of that fact?" It was obvious that he was. I said, "I wouldn't be. I'd be ashamed of that." I said, "Let's suppose," and ladies and gentlemen, this is a tremendous supposition. Let's suppose, I asked this pastor, that the people in your church were interested in cultivating their home life. On what night of the week would you suggest they do that? To which he responded with the agnostic, "I don't know." And that pastor's ignorance forced a question in my mind. Is it possible that our churches are doing more to break up our homes than they are to build them up? Are we engaged in a program of competition with the home or of cooperation with the home? Do we conceive the home to be our greatest adversary or our greatest ally? Men and women, the church is not and can never become a substitute for a parent. There is no substitute for a parent. And God never called the church to function in that realm. There are only 2 divinely ordained agencies in the New Testament. One of these is the church, and the other is the home. And I believe the church and the home are divinely devised as a cooperative. The church, biblically conceived, is a training ground And one of the primary purposes of a New Testament church is to equip parents for their work of ministry in their home. Not to do their work for them, but to equip them to do their work. You know, it's an exciting thing to be in the ministry, but it's particularly exciting to me to be in the ministry of equipping parents. God has given me wonderful opportunities, not only in local churches, but through various organizations and in various conferences, to minister to couples. And I talk on family worship and family finances, and family recreation and sex education, etc., etc. You know, every time I get the same experience, it's like preaching from 3 Timothy. Where in the world did you get this? It's all in the Scriptures. But it's amazing how we can overlook the obvious. And I sometimes wonder what in the world we have been doing in our churches. When I realize that the greatest breakdown on the American scene today is the breakdown of home life. And I am not speaking simply of the unregenerate world. I know it's fractured and decimated there. I would expect that. When I see the breakdown of evangelical home life in our country, I am greatly disturbed. And I believe our churches need to get back into the business of equipping parents for their work of ministry. Now, the home sorry that those of you who are not up here where the Okies are. I want to know is how in the world did Oklahoma ever steal Joe? You knew they had to come to Texas for a man like that. Meanwhile, back on the ranch, the home, as conceived by the New Testament, is a proving ground. It's a proving ground for training those who will take over places of leadership in the church. Did you ever read 1 Timothy, 2 Timothy, Titus, the pastoral epistle? You take the time to read and to study these epistles, you will discover that an elder, a deacon in the local assembly must have clear-cut qualifications. And among those qualifications is competency in his home life. One that ruleth well his own home. And he explains, if you don't know how to rule your own home, friend, you are disqualified to rule the church. His argument is, if a man can't function in a limited sphere, don't enlarge it. And you know, I've done some interesting studies. I have studied over 1,500 church constitutions representing every major denomination and group across this country. And the interesting thing is, conspicuous by its absence are the requirements of the New Testament related to the home. Some of these constitutions are absolutely unreal. They not only have the filthy 5 and the nasty 9 and the dirty dozen. They've got everything on that list that you can imagine. Everything except New Testament specifications. I believe if you're looking for a man to serve as a deacon or an elder or a leader in your local church, the first place you ought to look is in his home. And the reason we have a breakdown in our churches is that we have a serious breakdown in our home, the proving ground for leadership in the local church. And we're breaking down in the home because the church is ceasing to fulfill its primary function. Now just stop and think for me with a moment. The average church has a child for approximately 1% of his time. The home has him for approximately 83% of his time. The public school, the other 16%. Now, if we can combine these two, particularly in terms of a training relationship, it's my judgment that if you make an impact of 84% of the time of a child in terms of spiritual infection, nothing in any public school can undo that impact. And I think sometimes we get all shook up over the public school, and I am not suggesting that we should not be disturbed in this area. What I'm suggesting is that it can be a cop-out. It can be a dodge for facing the deeper issue. But the breakdown is coming in our home.